Welcome back for another tutorial mission in Kerbal space program. Flying a relative of the workhorse, calling it the dock horse here. Most everything is the same on this ship except for the remote control system here and the docking port have replaced the command capsule for this particular flight. Now, today's lesson is going to be orbital intercept and docking. Unfortunately, this is going to be the point where if you're playing the demo at home, this is not going to be a mission you're going to be able to follow along with in your own game, at least not completely. Docking ports are not part of the demo version, at least not that I'm aware of, and neither are the remote controls. The remote controls aren't a big deal, but the docking port, obviously, you can't dock if you don't have one of them. So, you will be able to do the intercept maneuvers. You will be able to do the rendezvous maneuvers if you wanted to practice with them, if you wanted to try them out. You'll end up basically recreating one of the early Gemini missions from the real world, where they had two ships up in orbit and they had to try and rendezvous them from, different launch times. And they basically got close together and sort of parked next to each other. So you can go that far. You just won't be able to reproduce the docking portion of it. For everyone else, actually for everyone, let's not be exclusive. So our goal today is to dock this here ship with this here ship that's all the way on the other side of the planet. Now there are a couple of different ways that I can get an intercept for that ship. I'm going to do this one the hard way though, because the easy way, you already pretty much know how to do the... once you see how to do the hard way, you'll be able to figure out how to do the easy way just fine. You already know how to do a transfer orbit, so that's going to be our first step. I want to match orbits with that machine. And I don't need to get it exact at this point because I'm just... Again, I'm doing it the hard way so that you can see... Oops, I'm already passing it. That's right, that's fine. Yep, I'm also on a plane. There we go. So I'm doing this the mega hard way. I'm just being a ditz all over the place so that you can see how to adjust from all kinds of different problems that might crop up. Basic maneuvers in orbit are tricky enough. Intercepts are even trickier. But there's a good reason why you want to go through all this trouble. I want to do this, actually, is what I want to do. Thank you. Okay. There's a good reason for going through all this trouble, and the good reason is, remember our old adage, the fuel is at a premium in space, and the more fuel you have, the more cool stuff you can do. But since you can only launch from the surface with so much fuel, one good way of recovering fuel is to dock with other things that have fuel and take it from them. One of the things that I love doing is setting up orbital refueling depots. I usually use much bigger ships than I'm using right now for it, but it doesn't matter what size the ship is. If it's got fuel in it and it's got a docking port, you can take the fuel from one and put it into another. So, for example, if you want to have a bunch of orbital refueling stations around Kerbal at different orbital inclinations and different orbital altitudes, so that once you get a ship off the ground, you can top it off at one of the stations and then go do whatever you want to do. You can also put orbital refueling stations around the moon. And the orbital refueling spacecraft is really just as simple as a fuel tank, an engine to get it there, a remote control system to get it there, and some batteries and a docking port. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. Personally, I like using the big orange fuel tanks because they store so much. I also like putting some RCS fuel tanks on there too to draw from. But it doesn't need to do anything else other than sit there and be a refueling station for your primary missions. And that's one of the best uses of the docking system, but you can also do exactly the same thing as NASA does in the real world and use orbital docking and rendezvous for constructing things in space that would be too big or unruly to construct on the ground. For example, the Apollo missions, they didn't necessarily do much in the way of rendezvous. They did some. The lander and the command capsule were all in the same Saturn V rocket, but the if you look at how the ship flies through space, especially if you want to watch like Apollo 13, they demonstrate it perfectly. The lunar lander was actually in a storage bay beneath, quote unquote, the rest of the ship on the Saturn V rocket. So when the crew capsule got shot off, the petals of the fairings opened up to reveal the lunar lander. The crew in the command capsule had to turn around and re-rendezvous with the lunar lander in order to dock with it properly and go on their way. You can do that same kind of stuff here in Kerbal Space Program. You can assemble a lander and a command capsule. You can maybe launch them in different rockets and then assemble them in space so that you can make each one of them bigger and more effective for the job that you have in mind. Or you can do it for, you know, space stations. Maybe you don't just want a refueling station. Maybe you want to have Kerbals up there as a science team or something like that. Those work too. All kinds of reasons to want to do docking, but in order to do docking and to do any of that kind of cool stuff, you first need to know how to rendezvous and then dock. Now you notice I've got my orbits more or less matched. I could have done it much more precise by setting a target, which I will do now. But, you know, for the moment, my periapsis is 236, and my target's periapsis here in green is 245. So there's a little bit of difference in my orbits, but they're not terrible. They're in the same ballpark. But you notice that the ship that I want to dock with is on the other side of the damn planet. This is what I meant by doing this the hard way. What I could have done is waited until my transfer orbit intercepted with the target that I wanted to dock with, and it would have made this a lot easier. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate why this is a problem. It's not a problem. It's overcomable. It's a little bit harder, but it's not that bad. So what happens? How do I catch up in this orbit up to this vehicle? Well, I can't. And you already know the reason why I can't. It just might not be readily apparent. If I try to speed up to catch up with this ship, what happens to my apoapsis? I can't speed up to catch up with this ship. What happens if I try to slow down to catch up with the ship? There goes my orbit again. So basically what it means is that if you want to catch up with or let something else catch up to you, you cannot stay in the same orbit. Everything you do to try and catch up with something else, gravity, I'm looking at you, changes your orbit. So you have to be okay with changing your orbit, basically. That's the only way to get this to work. So since I'm behind, I guess you could say, the dock horse here, the best way I'm going to be able to intercept this particular ship based on my position is to lower my orbit on one side. Because remember, the closer you are to the planet, the faster you're going. So I'm basically going to cut a corner here. If I wanted to let it catch up to me, say it was further behind me, or say it was more behind me than in front of me, say I wanted to let it catch up, well, then I'd raise my apoapsis to let it cut the corner on me. And when you cut a corner, it goes faster. Same idea here, just not with cars. So I'm going to drop my apoapsis again, and we're going to catch up. Now remember, in space, the more aggressive you get with these maneuvers, the more fuel you're going to consume. And we're trying to use this as a method of getting more fuel, not necessarily burning more fuel. So the less fuel that we can use to make this happen, the better off. So being patient pays off. Let me just do this before I botch it. There's no reason why I chose that that specific altitude. There's no reason whatsoever. I didn't choose that altitude for any reason at all. Because it doesn't matter so much when there's that big of a gap. All I want to do is catch up. Now, it could have made the maneuver much more aggressive, and it would have made me catch up a lot sooner. But I don't want to be aggressive, because that 70 meters per second worth of delta V that I just spent to lower my apoapsis, I'm going to need to spend it again to be able to bring it back up so that I'm in line with the other ship when I get to that point. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to take a couple laps around this planet, and because I'm cutting the corner on this planet, the dock horse is going to basically be going slower at one point than I will be when I hit my periapsis. The periapsis will be where I'm at my fastest, and I'll be able to catch up on some of the distance here. This is what these red lines, what these red markers indicate. So on my next pass, when I am here, my target is going to be here. And every time I orbit, you're going to see this gap get a little bit smaller. The goal is obviously to line it up so that when I am here, my target is also here. But I'm doing it in a fuel-efficient way. I'm going to be patient, and I'm going to take a couple of laps around the block to let that happen on its own. The more aggressive you get with this approach, it can work. You can get very aggressive with these. I could have done this very simply. I could have probably done it in one orbit if I really wanted to, but I didn't want to pay the fuel cost to do it. So now watch the red marker jump. Now it's a little bit closer. And as that gets closer and closer, I'm going to keep watching to see how much that changes each lap. Since I'm not changing my orbit, it should change by more or less the same distance each time. And then as it gets close enough that I feel comfortable adjusting it, I'm going to do one more pass and I should be pretty close. Then I'll make some fine-tune adjustments to my orbit so that I bring those in at as close as I can get on that pass. Now usually this has multiple markers per... It'll usually go 2 laps at a time. It'll show me what my approach will be this orbit right here, and then it'll show me what my approach is at the next orbit. I don't know what's going on with Kerbal Space Program today. I've actually recorded this twice because I screwed up and didn't hit the freaking record button last time. It's doing better than it was because it was jumping all over the place last time, but it's still not displaying as many as it should. It should actually have 2 different colors. It should have one that's red for my next pass, and then one that's magenta for the second lap. But here we're going to see... right here. So you see now this is going to be the next lap I take. So what I want to do is I want to make this go to 0, because as soon as I put my navigation marker just past that point, that's how far the difference is going to be if I do one more lap exactly the way I'm doing it. So this is where I want to start adjusting my orbit. Right here. Now I'm going to make those come to 0. So my next orbit is still locked in. This navigational marker is actually... Whoops. Not what I wanted. Oh, damn. I gotta close that. So, this is still locked in. This is going to be what happens my next orbit. But the orbit after that is the one that I want to alter. So I'm going to increase my speed back up to where it's supposed to be. See, there it was. So you see my 2 intersect points there. Okay, I see what's going on. All right. So since I only have 1 intersect point, that's what's happening. And the goal is to get these 2 points as close as possible. I don't really feel like taking too many more laps to do this. So I'm just going to... I'm going to settle for 30 kilometers worth of separation right about here. I'll settle for that. I can get closer than that, but it's not worth the hassle to me. I guess I can actually move it around a little bit and see what happens. There we go. That's actually a little bit better. So at this point, no, that's 48. I'm actually on a slight inclination, it looks like. I'll cancel that and start that over. So what happens if I put it here? There we go. 40. And that's really what this is all about at this point. It's if you know how to do the math, then you can try doing the math. But I don't know how to do the math yet myself, so now it's just a matter of sort of trusting the UI to be doing the math for you. And you just get it as close as you can. Still not quite where I'd like it to be, though. I might have to settle for that. Let's see what happens. So I think, I believe it's within 50 kilometers that I can start actually making this happen. Is there anywhere else I can put it? Oh, that's actually 10 there. We'll do that right there. But yeah, there's no good way for me to tell you how to do that. It's just a matter of experience and feel and moving around. That's why I love using the maneuver nodes rather than trying to do this all, you know, in real time. It just does not work, especially with an intercept. Use maneuver nodes, trust maneuver nodes, tinker around with them until they give you the result you want. It's just a matter of deciding, of knowing why these things do what they do. So now that we've sort of done the basic maneuvers, you should be able to go into the advanced maneuvers, which is exactly what this is. So now we'll fast forward a bit. And you can see the distance closing on my target here. In fact, I can go into normal mode, and you can actually see it off in the distance there. That is my target, 56, 55 kilometers away, right out there. But I want to stick in map mode for just another couple of minutes until we get this final burn done here. But you should notice something. My orb has changed. This orb is no longer displaying the same information that it was. I got close enough to my target that my orb has changed navigational modes. It's no longer in orbit mode, because we all know that I'm going more than this around the planet. I'm going a couple of thousand meters a second around this planet. This number here now, 225 meters a second, is my speed relative to my target now. And my marker here, my prograde marker here, is not the direction that I'm actually traveling around the planet. That is this the direction that I'm traveling in relation to my target, which is right here in the pink. So I am moving at 217 meters a second right now relative to my target in this direction. That's going to become very important very soon. I'm actually going to switch over into fine control mode here in a second too, using the caps lock key, because it's getting a little unruly. So I still got 5 minutes now. My navigational marker, my burn marker hasn't changed. It still won't, no matter what mode you're in. It's always going to point in the right direction. So let's fast forward just a little bit more. I don't want to go too fast because I do not want to botch this turn. If I botch this burn, then it's going to be a lot of hell to try and get it back. I'm actually going to pop my fuel up too. So this phase is actually very critical. If you screw it up right here, then it might cause a lot of problems trying to get it back. And notice my point of intercept is still almost a full orbit away still, even after this burn. But we're being patient. I'm not even going to burn at full throttle here, because even a tenth of a meter a second at this phase will cause drastic results elsewhere. Nothing we can't overcome. But see, now my intercept, my closest point of separation was, what, over 10 kilometers before? Now it's 9.1. So even just that tiny little bit of difference between my heading and my speed versus what I had calculated out causes big differences here. That's why, even though NASA's full of super geniuses, why you're always hearing people talking about correction maneuvers and things like that. Just because you can't always do it, you know, spot on one-to-one. So now let's fast forward a little bit more, and you're going to see the distance between my target and me shrinking even more. We're not going to worry about that until we get close. That's going to be our closest point of approach right there, so that's where we're going to start worrying about. You see the two lines are not overlapping yet, and they should be. But we're not going to worry about that until we get to our closest point of intercept. And I'm not even going to get it exact. I'm just going to get in the ballpark there, because the closest point of intercept is not necessarily super important. Just getting in the area is good enough, because that's where the orb comes in. So, yeah, right about here is fine with me. So, at this point, I don't need the map screen anymore. The map screen is no longer going to do me any good. Everything else, I'm going to have to use the orb for. So, like I said, this number here is relative to my target, not to anything else. So, my speed is changing at 23 meters per second compared to this object. This is my retrograde marker. That means that it is to that object, not to the planet. So everything I do from here on out, including this little maneuver I'm about to perform right here, I'm going to kill my velocity by moving prograde in the direction I'm targeting, traveling relative to this target. I'm going to kill my speed, and I'm going to go down to 0. And be very gentle with this, because every little bit changes it. Right, and you notice that I'm almost pointed directly away from my target. That's what that marker is there. Now my velocity, according to my target, is almost 0. Now the problem is, it's changing every single second, because my orbits are not lined up. I mean, I've got a wild separation here, and I've got another wild separation over on this side over here. So, once you get close, once you start your rendezvous, you cannot screw around, because every second you go, see, it's changing again. I haven't touched anything. And now I was going at 0 meters per second, or pretty close to it. Now I'm almost at 2 meters a second in a different direction. So this is one of those times where you have to be on the ball. It's one of the few times when you really cannot be too patient. So the goal here is, this is my target marker, this is the direction the target is, which is dead ahead in front of me. And this is my prograde marker, how I'm moving relative to that target. So my obvious goal now is going to be to make my prograde marker line up with my target. And this is one of those things that you just have to get a feel for how to maneuver it around. You're never going to, your first maneuver, your first rendezvous is not going to be pretty. In fact, I don't know how many different times I tried to rendezvous in the early days, trying to figure this stuff out on my own, and ended up doing laps around my target because I just didn't have a feel for it yet. You're going to do it wrong. The best tip I can give you is to, again, just be patient. Don't go too fast, and don't try to do too much too quickly. Just do little tiny changes, and I'm going to actually move my camera around. This is another good idea right here, especially if you like flying games. I've got it in chase mode right now, so that I'm actually lined up the same orientation as my orb is now. So now everything that I do here is going to be reflected down here at the orb as well. I'm going to rotate a little bit, just because I like that kind of stuff. And now is also a good time to start introducing you to the docking system, the lateral thrusters. Now, remember, the whole reason that we put these thrusters on here in the first place, this is it. This is why we put these on here. Up until now, I haven't even touched them. But now I'm going to turn these thrusters on by hitting the R key. Right down here, the RCS is now turned on. Now, with my SAS turned on, if I rotate, you can see gas coming out of my thrusters now. I'm using my thrusters to rotate. You don't need to do that. You can turn off RCS at will and continue to use, because otherwise you're burning fuel. You don't need to do that. But what I want to do is I want to use these thrusters to make changes to my lateral direction. See how far off my prograde marker is now? Just because my orbit isn't perfectly lined up with my target yet, I need to be watchful of that. And what I want to do is I want to keep that prograde marker pointed at my target as much as I can. So now I'm going to use lateral thrusters. W, A, S, and D work good for rotation of your ship. J, K, L, I, and M for lateral thrusters. So watch as I press the L key. Watch what happens to my prograde marker. You can see the jets coming out of my thrusters. I'm going to actually turn off fine control to make this a little bit better. See how it's changing? Now, I'm a little bit too far out. I don't want to do this too much that way, but I wanted to show it to you because it's going to come into play later. So I want to still use my most powerful thruster instead. I want to use my main engine. But I'm only barely on the throttle. And in order to bring that prograde marker back into the direction it needs to be pointing, I'm sort of splitting the difference. Instead of burning directly to my target, I'm burning a little bit to whatever side I need to in order to coax that marker to get back to where it's supposed to go. It doesn't need to be exact because I'm still 5 kilometers out. At this point, I am going to want to consider slowing down, though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip around. And remember, I've got the magenta marker right here shows the exact opposite of where where my target is. So I'm going to use this to control my speed a little bit because I'm going a little bit faster than I'm comfortable with. I'm going to bring my speed back down to 0. And I'm just going to keep my marker pointed on my retrograde and just very slowly use my main engine rather than my RCS thrusters, because these kinds of big changes in speed are not helpful. Right, and now I'm going to turn on my lateral thrusters again and correct it so that my retrograde marker is pointed exactly the opposite of my, oops, JKL, H and U, I'm sorry, it was H and U that up and down. No, it wasn't H and U. Crap. You'll have to look that up yourself. I forgot what those controls are. I use a different set of controls, actually, for that. So I'm going to flip back around. I don't like using the JK thruster controls. A lot of people love them. I am not one of those people. I like using the docking controls. Now, you can dock just fine without them. You can dock using the JKLI approach. But I use the docking system because it allows me to change back and forth between all kinds of stuff. It's a little bit easier for me. It'll take a little bit of experimentation for you to decide what your comfort is. So in docking mode, you've got a couple of different control modes. You've got your lateral thruster control mode. If you hit space, it goes to rotational control mode, the difference between these two buttons here. The blue indicates that I'm in fine control. If I hit caps lock, it puts it back into regular. I use all kinds of fine control at this point. The keys, I'm going to go back into lateral thruster mode. The keys for lateral thruster are the same as your normal rotational thruster, so W, A, S, and D. So I'm going to get my prograde marker back on here. Up and down are control and shift. My main engine, when you're in docking mode, your main engine is disabled, so there's no way of accidentally firing this engine, which is what I like. Because if I fire this engine now, I'm gonna splat in front of into the screen here. W and S is control and is forward and backwards, so I'm gonna bring my speed back up now that I'm pointing in the right direction. I'm gonna bring it up to about 10 because I'm still quite a ways out. And I know that my thrusters are powerful enough to counteract 10. I wasn't so sure about 30 if I got too close. In fact, I can go to 20. And you notice my monopropellant up here, it's very fuel efficient, but it doesn't produce very much thrust. So when you're talking about high delta V maneuvers, it's best to use your main engine whenever possible. But now that I'm within 3 kilometers or so, I don't want to use my main engine anymore. Part of the reason why I don't want to use my main engine anymore is because it's a bit of a blunt instrument. But part of the reason is the exhaust gas from your main engine can affect the object that you're docking with. It actually can destroy something that you're... If you burn your engine right at something else, it can destroy it. Or it can push it off course. So when I get close enough, I don't like using my main thrusters anymore. Your RCS thrusters, even though technically in reality they should push things around, in Kerbal Space Program they don't. So you can use them as close to whatever you want as you want. That was a weird phrase, actually. I don't know why I said that. Let's keep going at about 20 until I get within a kilometer. And at this point, I see that I'm not pointed quite where I want to be, so I'm going to hit the spacebar to put rotational control back on, and I'm going to turn off RCS so I'm not using my thrusters to turn, because there's no need burning fuel if I've got plenty of rotational control in my control wheels. Turn RCS back on, hit spacebar again to go back into lateral control. It's totally up to you which control scheme feels better for you. This just happens to feel better for me. But like I said, you can do the entire docking procedure if you know the keys and you're comfortable using the keys in staging mode instead. In normal operations mode, you can do it from here all the same. You don't need to go into docking mode. So now that I'm within a kilometer, I'm going to slow my speed down a little bit. I'm going to go down to 15. Because I don't want to come in too hot. You can, if you're good. You can, if you're lucky a little bit. I've seen somebody do a very high-speed intercept. That was fantastic. Scott Manley again. Scott Manley is the Kerbal Space Program master. He did a really high-speed intercept and did it absolutely beautifully. I am not Scott Manley. And if you're watching this tutorial, there might be a chance that you're not Scott Manley either. If you are Scott Manley, hi Scott, love your videos. And now we can actually see visually the object of our desire here. And we're going to slow down just a little bit more. And get that as close to 0 as I can. Good enough for me. All right. So now I'm going to bring my solar panels back in. I set a hotkey in the vehicle assembly building so that I can bring them all in at once, but you can just as easily right-click on each one and bring them in. I just don't want to get them clipped with this other one. I don't need to bring them in here. I did already open the docking port here. If you haven't done that already, you can actually right-click in the map screen and do it. But I've already got it done, so I don't need to worry about that. I do need to back off a little bit, so I'm going to jet downwards. And at the same time, I'm going to jet sideways until I'm roughly underneath the spacecraft. And I'm going to put some distance before I change my orientation here. I also am going to set my target as that docking port, specifically that docking port. And if I haven't done so already, I'm going to control from here, and I'm going to open this docking port right there as well. And docking at this point becomes a sort of a tedious exercise of adjusting your attitude and speed. Generally speaking, when I'm doing this on my game, I like to point all of my objects that I might dock with, I like to point them exactly north so that you always know exactly what direction you can approach at and have at least a header here. But I didn't do that with this, sort of on purpose, we'll say. It wasn't true actually, but we'll say it. We'll say it's true. We can say it's true. It's my party and I'll cry if I want to. So now we're just gonna very slowly, very carefully close that distance back up. Very slowly. If you go in too hot and you find that you can't stop in time, you will collide with what you're trying to dock with. That's usually not what you want to do. And this is where fine control, again using the caps lock button, so it's blue like this, that's where fine control really helps with this kind of maneuvers. You just got to be super patient. If you get impatient, you make way more problems for yourself. You know, like I said, the first couple of times that I tried to intercept with something, I would just run circles around the thing I was trying to intercept with because I was in too much of a hurry. And I didn't understand exactly what was happening. Now that I do, I can help you. as well. This is also where that docking alignment tool, the docking alignment mod, really comes in handy. Oops, I actually should kill my velocity a little bit here. This is where that mod comes in handy because the heads-up display, or the UI, I should say, the UI in Kerbal Space Program for this is not very good. There's a lot of stuff going on that you really have to just start moving the camera around. So at this point now, it's a matter of, once again, putting my prograde marker right on my target. But I want to make sure that my speed never gets above a meter a second when I'm this close. In fact, this is even a little bit faster than I'm comfortable with. And at this point, if you hover your finger over the SAS key, the T key, it'll actually serve you quite well. And you'll see why in a second. I'm slowing down to a crawl here because I know I'm not oriented quite right. The docking ports are magnetic. So, in fact, this is even faster than, say, a NASA spacecraft would dock. That's how very delicate these operations are in real life. And I'm pretty much parked with it. But I don't want to be parked, I want to be docked. Ever so carefully. The docking ports are magnetic, so once you get close enough, they're actually going to grab onto each other, but sometimes that grab can be somewhat violent, especially if I'm off kilter like I am right now. So if you turn off your SAS key just as soon as you see that happening, then it's going to make it a lot easier. Now I'm sort of tumbling, but I can actually kill that by turning the RCS back on, and boom, we are docked. If you're having trouble making that final connection where the docking ports are attracting each other magnetically, but they're just not locking into place, turn off your SAS, and that'll usually settle it down. It's basically your spacecraft fighting the forces that are being imposed on it by the other docking port. And that's it. We're docked. And now we can actually use this satellite to its purpose, and that is to steal fuel from it. So you can steal fuel by something. You can go back in the staging menu if you want. You can do it any way you want. Right-click on one of the fuel tanks, and then Alt right-click on the other. And you can see I've actually already dipped into the fuel supply of this one as it is. Now I want to transfer fuel from this one over to this one. So in and in until they're full. And it transfers fuel through the dock, and bingo bango. I'm going to do the same thing with my RCS fuel, because I burned some RCS fuel getting here. Let's refill that. And voila. Refueling station. Tiny refueling station. Not very useful, but tiny fueling stations can be easily made into much larger fueling stations by doing exactly what I just did. I was going to demonstrate how to do that same maneuver with this workhorse here. That's actually why I put it into orbit the way I did. But it turns out I sort of covered all of the things that you need to know in the last episode. So if we recall, let's actually switch over to it. And we'll turn on Kerbal Engineer so that we can see its orbital properties here. If we recall, not only is this ship on a highly inclined orbit at 31 degrees, 32 degrees, it is also somewhat eccentric. Its apoapsis is at 311, its periapsis is at 142. So docking with a circular orbit is much, much easier than docking with something that is on an elliptical orbit like this. But I already sort of showed you how to do everything you needed to do before. First, you match your inclination, and then you get your periapsis as close as you can, and then adjust your apoapsis. Everything else, once you do the hard version of the maneuver, the capture maneuver like I showed you, once you do the hard version, everything else works more or less the same way. So I'm not going to repeat the process here. We already know how to do that. It's just a lot harder. If you want to set up refueling stations, it's my recommendation, strongly recommend putting in an equatorial orbit and facing everything so that their top is facing exactly north or exactly south. It's the best reference point to get your orientation right. And make their orbits as circular as you can make them. And you can put them in any orbit you want to. I mean, I used to, for Sandbox before career mode started, I had a couple of refueling stations in geosynchronous orbit, way out here away from the influence of Kerbin. I would dock ships at the refueling station, refill them once they got out to that high orbit, because it's much easier to do maneuvers after you get out to the high orbits, so more fuel efficient that way. You can also put refueling stations around the moon, for example. If you want to set a lander there, it's much easier to have a refueling station, just robotic mission, just floating around the moon with a bunch of extra fuel it is not going to use, and then send your ships out to the moon, refuel there or refuel on the way back, so that you don't have to worry quite so much about your fuel limit like I was when I got out there, and like I would have been had I gone back the way I did. Put one around Minmus too, wherever the frick Minmus is, right there. Put a couple around Minmus. Put a couple around Duna in preparation for a landing. The system of using refueling, gas stations is a very, very smart move. And in order to do that, you need to know how to intercept, and you need to know how to do docking maneuvers. I'm not sure what I'm going to do for the next lesson. Honestly, for all of the rest of the stuff that I can think of doing, I need to practice them myself before I start trying to tell anyone else how to do them. For example, I might end up doing a mission on intercepting one of the asteroids here, especially since you don't know what its orbit is because it's too far away. I might end up doing one of those. I might end up doing some advanced orbital maneuvers like slingshots or planetary captures or things like that, but I haven't decided what I want to do yet, because all of that's going to require quite a bit of practice on my part before I record them, since I'm kind of rusty in this mode. Until then, this has been Schadenfreude Gamers. I hope it's helped, and if you're having troubles, you're not alone. It's a steep, steep learning curve on this game. It is rocket science. It's meant to be as complicated as rocket science is. It's brain surgery. That's also complicated. Don't feel bad if you're having trouble figuring it out, and if this video hasn't helped you enough, definitely go to Scott Manley's channel too. Scott Manley has some great tutorials on Kerbal Space Program as well as a lot more of the science involved in them. Hope this has helped, and this has been Schadenfreude Gamers signing off.